thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope I'm audible. Yeah? Okay. Is that better? Hi. Thanks for joining us today. We are joined by the amazing designers as they were introduced. I would like to talk today to both of them about the present moment in design in general, of course, but we are locating it in our industry, our publication industry. I'm joined by two people whose worlds are immersed in storytelling, visual image making, and of course the serendipitous craft of book design. I write a lot about design. I also teach, and it's always engaging for me to get into these discussions. And of course, when we talk about design today, we all know that in the packaging of the book, the design is often looked at as the cover of the design, the cover of the book being the central, conversation about design starts from there. And my own training has been in visual communication design. That's also what I teach. And there's a very core, there's a central idea to the discipline of visual communication design, which is that the communication has to be clear, efficient, and immediate. And I don't think anything else does that better than a book's cover, right? So I personally feel that it's one of the it's the strongest mode of visual communication design that we have, where the impact and the intrigue has to be created immediately. So I want to talk to Gunjan, Ahlawat Gunjan, who's practiced this for decades and decades. But I want to ask you that the books exist in a very different world now. I believe when you started, the visibility wasn't as much. The circulation of the book wasn't as much. And they are, in this age of micro content, they are circulated. The visuals of the book, the design of the book are circulated at a very different pace to an audience who has a lot to consume. So I'd like to ask you, how has your practice endured that, and how has this shifted for you?
Thank you. I think it's a bittersweet situation. 20 years back, when I started in publishing, in some ways there was more freedom. At a publishing house, how a cover gets approved is that once you have created cover options, we have something called jackets meeting, where you have editorial, you have sales, you have marketing. Back in those days, we never had any such thing, which was blessing in some ways, because then there aren't too many personal feedbacks coming from the stakeholders. However, but as time progressed, we started to have jackets meeting where all these stakeholders will come. And sometimes what happens is, I've been hearing, I attended Banu's session in the morning, and we just had a session on translation just before us. And I was very consciously hearing Deepa, which was so beautifully talking about text translations. A designer, what we do is, it's a visual translation of what is there inside. And therefore, there will be a lot of imagination, a lot of curiosity, a lot of personal interpretation as well. And that may not work for everybody. And therefore, more so in a current scenario, when you have jackets meeting, sometimes conversations could turn a little personal and therefore more heated. And that's disappointing, that's disheartening for the creative person, because I firmly believe the way I situate my practice is beauty comes much later. My work, my thinking, my imagination, it sits in the text. I like to have tons of conversations with my editors, with authors, and that's where the answers lie for me. which I feel in these meetings, all of that gets washed away. And it could be disappointing for the creative person, because then they have to go back and listen to those feedback, which, as I said, sometimes if it is objective, I don't think any designer would deny. And I think both of you would agree on that. But when it's personal, she likes purple and I like blue. Now we can continue to argue till cows come home. But so yeah.
Yeah, that conversation as the fodder of, you know, that the meat that you extract from for your book cover. And that's why I think I'll use that word many times, that how serendipitous it is, that sometimes you're just haunted by an image, right? And then you end up meeting a brief or meeting a story, and you're like, you know what, I've been thinking about this image and this works. It just works for this particular book or this particular author or what their politics stands for, right? So this is, I get what you're saying about the processes becoming almost like flattening of the processes.
And just to also add, Devangana, to that, is design is never about beauty, or the way I understand, or I think the way any informed and educated designer would understand. It's a process, it's imagination, it's politics, it's culture, it's tool, it's so many things put together. So when you see a cover, the image, the challenge for us is that the image and the text, they have to work independently as well as together. So doing that marriage, it's not easy. Sifting through thousands and thousands of fonts to make sure that, again, Banu said in the morning, which is so beautiful, is that a word denotes a world. For us, when we design, we define. And that takes a lot of skill, experience, qualification.
Ujan, coming to you. I'm coming back to the question of the pace in which books are circulated today. Now, your work delves into a lot of narratives, world building, myth, fantasy. You have made graphic novels, the current one being Zoraver and
The Lost God.
The Lost Gods. I keep calling it the Zoraver series because I see that there's a promise of making many more volumes. And now, in the way a graphic novel is designed or illustrated, you have to think in a micro episode. You have to think in panels. You have to think in get under the skin of the character. That how has this pace of consumption changed how you approach that kind of narrative visual storytelling, in terms of has the scale become different, has the composition become different, are you thinking in new colors, like how has this affected your practice, which is otherwise it needs a kind of simmering with the reader and the maker. Graphic novels are not made overnight, right? So please tell us about that dimension.
Yeah, I think the question which really you're kind of asking is like the difference between the temporal values of both those things. So yes, in like traditional publication design, you have a certain methodology that you kind of follow, whether it's like research and reading and things like that, and then you get into how you translate that visually. This was a very different kind of publication design process in terms of like having to create a narrative, having to create a story, then going back, then you visualize that story, then you kind of go back again to the story and be like, okay, we need to make a script out of this story. And with that script comes a second level of almost visual storytelling, which is almost similar to what you would describe as like a storyboard, and then marrying those two things together. So yes, while it did require like how you would mean to say in terms of like the research and the practice that one uses to create like publication design, this was very interesting in that it had a certain degree of back and forth, which was really nice actually, because then you get to review things at different stages, which I'm not sure you would otherwise, because again, the turnaround time for, traditional book cover design is much shorter. And in a project like this, it does tend to like work in a way where you have to sort of reevaluate at times, sometimes like things change very drastically, very fast. I worked with a friend of mine. He wrote the script, and we were constantly changing and chopping and changing. And even through our editorial process, which was very interesting for us as like a writer, illustrator, designer sort of combo, to have to constantly go back, relook at our work, pivot to other things, change the story. That was interesting in the whole process of like the time it took to create a story and how it affects, different levels of the sort of till you reach the publishing process. Yeah, that was an interesting sort of change. Yeah.
I am interested in deconstructing the name of our session, which is Designed to Please. I feel like it's particularly charged, where I really want to ask both of you, who are we pleasing in this industry? Are we pleasing when it comes to designing for, is it focused on the audience? Is it for the editorial intent? Is it for the marketing strategy? Ahlawat, I want to ask you, because you also work across markets. You also work for an international industry, and you also work. You've spent decades doing Indian book cover and book design. How has that shifted, and how has that? Who are we pleasing here? Who wins in this conversation on design?
I feel there is no one fixed answer to this. And yes, I agree with you. I worked in India, and I used to think maybe we work in a certain way. I work with a lot of clients in the UK and EU, less in US. I don't know if you guys will be happy to know or not, but the pain points remain the same. So, sorry, just come again. What was the question?
My question.
Who are we pleasing?
Who are we pleasing? Yes. Correct. Personally, I don't think in the first go I'm trying to please anybody but the text. And as I said, I said so many things design is, but design is also a responsibility. So it's a responsibility for me as a designer to respect the author's words. I'm a loyal servant when I'm designing a book cover for that book, because this is somebody's years and years of work. So first thing is for me is how true I am to text, and am I able to represent that clearly and strongly. And of course, then conversation moves from there when it goes on to editors and their feedback, and sales, and even authors. They pitch in. So I don't think it's a linear thing to say that I'm trying to please X stakeholder. It's not a very linear process.
I want to take it from there and ask you: Is there anything truly Indian about book cover design in India, like Indian book cover design? Because for me, those boundaries are definitely getting blurred. People are wanting a more global approach to design for a lot of things. It might work for certain projects, it might not work. But is there, in your so many years of experience, have you cracked that one formula where it's like, okay, this is uniquely Indian for us to approach design like that? And I'll ask you the same. Yeah.
Difficult to say, but a lot of times sales would say, oh, we want a cover like this. And that cover is published probably in UK or US. Do you have the bones to take that, the boldness of that design and publish it in India? I disagree. So you want me to then replicate this, and probably the appreciation of design is of much higher degree in those places, unfortunately. And a lot of times here in India, we are indirectly, invisibly asked to replicate something, which and you can word it in so many ways. So you can argue the case, but this is personally, after working for almost 20 years in India, I feel that's the case, because rarely a salesperson would allow to put something which is so bold and courageous, and increasingly so. They're just so worried about, oh, this will not look good on online, and this would not look on print. And of course, with a lot of other politics that Deepa was also talking about, considering all of that. And I can quote an example. I was working on Salman Rushdie's last book, and it is set in a kingdom in South India, and there are mentions of 2 temples. And my first attempt was a gorgeous representation of those temples, and they liked it, but the design was shot down purely because we can't have temples on this book, and I'll rest my case.
Ujan, again, is who you also design a lot of entry points into experience design, right? A lot of graphics that you see today at the festival, this is for the audience, are actually led by Ujan and his team, where you are, there's wayfinding, and there is these big, the scale is massive, right? It's and very different from what we do in books and publishing. So the same question for you, who are you pleasing? And is there anything uniquely Indian about? Can we tomorrow stand in a world forum on design and say, this is Indian design?
Yeah. So I actually agree a lot with what he said regarding like who we're really pleasing. I mean, yes, source material, what is there on those pages, someone has used their imagination, their creativity to whatever degree to create a certain manuscript or a book or whatever it may be. And I think that deserves its due. Being true to the source material is something that I also agree with. Your research and your sort of entire process of forming visual identity should come from a place of being true to what you're kind of trying to sell at the end of the day. About like the other part, I think it's really fascinating that, yes, of course, it would seem like there is this need to be like, do you think you're sort of bold enough to be able to take those calls? And that is really like where we are in terms of any kind of visual communication, whether we can be the people who are taking that responsibility from taking text on a page to something that's on a cover that, hundreds and thousands of people sort of interact with, and that's their first interaction with that book or that piece of literature, is a responsibility. And I also think that in terms of like scale, and you're talking about like visual communication across books and events and things like that, even for things like events, a lot of it does come from ultimately storytelling, narrative building. Scale is the same. I mean, like a 1,000-page book or a 5-day sort of festival in that sense, then you're like looking to place it situated in a way where you're catering to an audience who come from different parts of the world, who have different ideologies, different politics, everything, right? So it has to be an amalgamation of all those sort of things. And of course, keeping that to situate it in a very sort of uniquely like Indian aesthetic is something that like we can try and do as like, of course, like designers. And you said like, is there something inherently Indian about like book publication? And of course, one can make it as such because we have such a rich like cultural identity in terms of everything else. I mean, textiles, crafts, art, just everything, film. So yeah, I would agree that like, you can draw from all those things in your research process. It's all about ultimately like a lot of visual communication is observation, right? And you draw from those things and then that's what forms your sort of identity, as it were. So I appreciate things looking like, global, international. And of course, they have to have a certain look to them. But like staying true to the text or staying true to your cultural identity is something that's always going to be unique. And we should be happy about that. Yeah.
Yeah. The personal voice in heavily commercial work. Okay. At this point, I also want the audience to keep that lens because you're talking about design and where do you see design? Does it lead the conversation for you? Is it the entry point? Again, just a lens to keep so that you can be with us in this conversation. Is it something that is the entry point of a process? Is it the middle? Is it the heart? Is it the core of the experience for you? or is it something that happens? It's an aftertaste. It happens in the end. It's pretty in your hands. Is in terms of book design. So just think of where you place design, because for me, if I would say that a core grievance of my practice as a book designer has been that I feel design is most of the times an afterthought in the whole process, where of course the book has gone through its edits and all of that, but then when we are met with the design brief, a lot of times it feels like, like I wish I was there in that room when this book was being acquired, because I would have given some, I don't think this title is sitting well in this font size. You have so many thoughts when it finally comes to you. And then designers, I feel, at least in our industry, I don't think are equal players in that kind of a discussion. Do you agree, Ahlawat? If what is your take on that? Because I feel like because you also said that when we were talking about just emulating the West in terms of a lot of, and sometimes it just works, but it also feels like a lot is being made, yes, but a lot of it is also looking very similar. There's almost like a visual fatigue in what we are seeing today. So yeah, do you think that where is the role of the designer in that whole the stakes of the whole book, as a not just as a pretty looking product in the end, but the book and the book marketing of the book and the selling of the book?
I agree with you, Devangana, on that yes, it's important. If design is important for that publishing house, it is important to include design early on, because like how editing is important for a book, and editing also says a lot, and it's a craft, so is design. When somebody reads a book, they have enjoyed the text. Well, first they see the cover, they have picked the book, read it, enjoyed the text, and when they keep the book, they close their eyes, and it should feel such a perfect marriage of what they just read and the cover that they saw. Even if initially to begin with they didn't get the cover, but when they finish the book, and it feels like an aha moment, and that's very satisfying, and that is only possible, I think, if the designer is involved from the beginning. In even, like you said, when the book is acquired, notes from the author, if they have any expectations, notes from the sales. I mean, I'll go back, don't get me wrong, please, that I'm anti-sales. I am not, because design is service at the end, and you are selling, you're making this into a beautiful product that you sell. But having those comments, suggestions early on in the day really helps in chiseling the process and chiseling the product and making everybody happy.
Ujan, yeah, same question for you. That are we taking any risks when it comes to book design in India?
In terms of like
book design in India, in terms of, even the insides of the book, in terms of how we are packaging it with the design lens.
So I think again, like, he's right in that it requires a certain degree of like involvement, which may or may not come, and it really depends from like person to person, or publication to publication, or even maybe author to author sometimes. I have been lucky enough to work closely with authors, and I actually consider that a better sort of practice in that sense. But that has also helped in the creating of the product itself, because when you're working closely with someone whose work is the literature, then it's a direct sort of like give and take of that thing. So even our book was, again, a direct give and take of that thing. So I think that really kind of helps, whether it's like something that you get involved with from the first day or the last day. I mean, it's really one of those things where you need a certain sense of understanding to kind of get there and like be like, okay, we've been on this journey together, but like, what is the ultimate outcome? And that's fairly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked that because again, I think that's been my personal fatigue as a designer. But again, how many of you must have seen book covers with floral backgrounds, bold text juxtaposed with the a very heavy floral image, right? And then there's a trend of borders with classical paintings, right? Again, the book might not necessarily demand that kind of a thing, but because it's something that is at the Waterstones bookstore, their window sales have this kind of an image. People want to emulate that. Every author, at least in my experience, recently wants an illustrated cover. When the book might not necessarily need an illustration, it might need a very strong journalistic photograph or a very documentary tone of archival photograph maybe. But because illustration is also, that's a very different debate altogether, because it's also a fairly new industry in the Indian context. But yeah, so I feel like that there's a certain visual sameness that we are striving for, and I don't know if necessarily it's a good thing, and that's why my question of risks comes into play. Speaking of trends recently, I also feel that we are, to stay relevant, a lot of times we jump on trends, right? Like, and then it is leading to a dissolving of the personal voice of an artist / designer, and I feel that heavily. But speaking of voice, the designer today is also an influencer, right? Like, I feel like those days are gone where designer was just on their desktop behind the scenes and you don't know where they are. And a lot of industries are appreciating the designer's role in the process now. What is your take on that? Because we've come from a time where, it still happens that designers are not credited for their work. The pay in our industry the design fee is still very poor. It remains unchanged, in fact. And so what is your comment on that? Where are we heading in terms of the designer as the social designer now becoming? We're hiring designers for their tastes and their visual styles and how they think about a particular philosophy, but are we able to value that in this process?
Even when I started my career in publishing or graphic design and then publishing, eventually accidental career, I never believed in trends. I still don't believe in trends, and I don't think I will believe in trends because they come and go like instant coffee. And I'm a firm believer design is a very responsible discipline, and it is not instant coffee the way I understand it. And therefore, I'll continue, and I'll repeat my words. I will continue to be the loyal servant of the written word inside the book and respond to that. The visual form can change. To Devangana's point, yes, sometimes it could be an illustrated approach is better than a typographic approach, or maybe a painting or a photographic approach. That depends upon the problem solving or the opportunity at hand. Yes, sometimes, and that takes me slightly when authors come and say, oh, I need illustrated cover, even if they have seen something which appeals to them visually and it may not necessarily work for their book. To answer that, it's an ongoing question all over the world in design fraternity, is it designer's job to educate the client / author, or they should be educating themselves on their own? So, and there's no fixed answer to this, because it depends upon how visually literate you are, how open you are to suggestions from an expert, which is a book designer in that case. So, yeah.
Ujan, your
My hot take.
Yes.
On trend setting. So much like, trend setting in itself, as the designer of today, as a trend setter, I think is, of course, very closely linked to how we see visual communication now. the number of mediums we have to absorb visual communication. And I think that because you're working with people who are maybe Instagram savvy, or like, there's so many different kinds of mediums, right? That in itself leads to that kind of like sameness, because everybody's kind of doing something similar to try
Instagrammability of a book.
Yeah, exactly. And that's both ways, right? That's on both sides of the spectrum. That's visual Instagrammers. There are also book Instagrammers. They're book influencers. So it's there. That ecosystem exists, and I think will continue to exist. And I think like that, to sort of like situate oneself within that is complicated, because you're always going to be working against like everybody else, because you're going to try and like everybody wants to kind of try and be a trend setter in that sense, and I don't think that's like a viable sort of thing. And also to the point of what did you say about after sort of
it was the designer as the social designer, the influential
and I think because like graphic design is in a way so highly sort of like the skill of visual communication and graphic designers is so, I don't want to say diluted, but it's because the access to that kind of work is so easy now. So anyone who can use like Canva or a tool like that can actually create sort of like anything that sort of we can create also.
Yeah.
And because there is sort of this sort of even keel in terms of like how much access you have, and everybody has access to, tools, whether they're like softwares or like AI tools or whatever they are. I think it just makes it all the more important to be able to stand out with those things, and that's actually more of actually being unique to yourself in terms of like, how do you stay relevant in that sort of ecosystem?
Yeah. Speaking of relevance, we are in an industry. Bookmaking is one field where there's a lot of human error, right? Like there are mistakes, there are print mistakes. You learn from, so many times you've printed the wrong thing and nobody knows but you, and you've gone to bed crying. So all of that happens in our work, right? Things don't work out. You really believe in an approach towards a cover and it doesn't work out. That's okay. But all that has remained it's deeply human to this work, right? Like you also said about conversations between people, authors, editors, and something just like light bulb moment, right? Now we are in a world of artificial intelligence where processes are being automated, processes are being changed. I for one have I work independently now, and I'm getting so many cover briefs where authors have themselves designed a book cover on ChatGPT or whatever, and they're like, I just want an illustrator to just render this. So the concept is already there. They're already heavy on the visual that they want. So processes like that are changing. They're asking ChatGPT for show me covers for this is a genre, and obviously they are receiving a specific set of. So the whole language there's a shift. I won't say that it's completely changed, but there is a shift. Now that it's here to stay, how, Ahlawat, I would like to begin with you. How do you think you will be able to work with that kind of the AI load in your work? How does that change your process? What's your take on that process in your journey ahead?
I surely knew this question will pop up.
Yeah.
So I wrote something. So I also write essays for design. So I wrote something, and I'm going to read this because I think it collects my thought in much cohesive way. My job as a book cover is to reveal yet to hide, to intrigue but not to give away, to raise curiosity but not to provide answers. Trending that balance between clarity of thought and yet embracing ambiguity is the toughest part of my job. How much is too much? Knowing that makes all the difference. and I can challenge if any AI can do this.
Yeah, I would like to respond with your comment on that, where how does this alter your way of looking at your own work, the work around you?
Yeah, completely. I think it's like I said, that access to visual communication is now so prevalent. One has to remain in that as a professional, and try and evolve with that. Whether I think AI is pro or anti is a separate thing altogether. I mean, one has to try and it'll exist. I think if one sees it as a tool, then that's good. There will always be need for creators, artists, illustrators. I think that human connection is always going to be something that is going to be the forefront of literary creation, because without that, we're stuck in that thing of sameness, so that collaboration between you and a author, a writer, whatever it is, that's always going to be the nexus of that point of, whatever it is. Yeah, creation.
Yeah, I'd like to be hopeful, but I also feel that there can't be an erasure of certain processes, like, the art of iteration, just iterate till you get it right. And sometimes you just instinctively, your intuition says that something just works, right? Like, I don't think that kind of an editorial thinking, which is honed, a sensibility that is really honed over time, at this point in my practice, I also don't see that happening. But yeah, we'll wait and watch. And okay, I think towards the end of this conversation, I'd like to also ask you, in the same breath, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, is there something like design integrity, what is integrity for you in design, in your practice? And any of you can take that first. So,
I mean, I think it's staying true to yourself, right? Like, ultimately, that's what you're doing as any creative person. And you try and hope to pivot, evolve your practice to whatever suits yourself best, and you have to sort of ride with it. I mean, you're doing something different, you said, after many years of being in the publication space. So you can tell us about that also. It might be interesting. Yeah, just to know, I mean, the ways where you can evolve as a creative person. And I think that's something that each one of us have to do in some level or the other.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'll go back to what I said at some point in the conversation, is that design is not linear, and I absolutely believe in that. Last year, I was art director for Penguin India for last decade. I decided to step down because I wouldn't say I was bored at all, but and I'm doing tons of freelance work in publishing across the world, but I wanted to reinvent myself, and I wanted to build upon what I have learned thus far and just translate it. So I went to the Royal College of Art in London last year to pursue another MA. This was my second MA in interior architecture, based through the lens of repurposing and reusing. And I felt, wow, I am such a good guinea pig for this concept, that I'm leaving my career at the peak of it. But the challenge was to see how you can translate something which was in 2D into 3D. And I have to say, I finished my master's last year, and it has been such a satisfying, gratifying, therapeutic experience to see that design translation, the boundaries and how far can you stretch the translation of design. And as someone said, I cannot recollect the name, but if you can design a button, you can design the airplane. Because the core philosophy of functionality, cultural aspects, psychology of user, ergonomics of it. And of course, there's an element of beauty, because who doesn't like a beautiful product? Or so all those things continue to remain spine of design for me.
Thank you for that. Yeah, for me, the integrity part will be just to make something intelligent and sensitive and not artificial, I guess. Yeah, that will be my my bit on that. We can take some questions. We have some minutes. Okay, we have a bunch of people. Yes, go ahead. However you want to take this, yeah.
Thank you so much for this insightful session. As a reader, I would say that sometimes we underestimate the power of design. We pick with a good design, but we don't think about the designer much. That's the bitter pill to swallow. But as an author, I understood the whole concept behind it. What I want to ask is that collaboration between a story and a design is a balancing act. That's what I have understood. So, where does the good design stop serving the text and start overcompensating for the story? Where is that fine line?
That for me?
Both of you.
Take it.
All three of you, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, the first instance is, of course, that, you are ticking certain boxes like we have been discussing. So I don't want to bore you again, brief coming in from editor, author, blah, blah, blah. All of that, of course, that's the first instance. Taking in sales inputs. What I used to do back in, I would barely go on internet. If I'm doing a fiction, I will not see what others are doing. I'll go to a bookstore and I'll see what books are coming. When I have done the concepts, before even sharing with my editor, I will make dummy and I'll go to a bookstore and I just sort of get the feelers, how the booksellers are feeling, because they are the ones who are actually dealing with readers on readers' buyers or day-to-day basis. And yeah, I treat them as like human libraries. And that's where I to your point, I've already checked the boundaries, at least to best of my ability. And then, I opened as an emotional sort of a palette for feedback to come in, which is a real market, juicy feedback. And, trust me, sometimes it can surprise you as well. So, yeah.
That's solid. We can take the next question. I hope you are happy with the answer. Yeah. Okay, can we?
Right. So I had a question. I'm very biased towards Gunjan's artworks, because I followed it for many years. Now, my question is, from a reader's perspective, I might be very stuck up as a reader, right? But when I look at a very attractive cover, I'm bound to, that would be an impetus for me to pick up the author. Yeah, so I completely get that you're saying you're responsible to the author, etc. But I think a book cover now in the genre of, there are so many publications, I think a book cover is at the pinnacle of getting the author to reach the audience. And I don't think it's happened even 10 years back. So I think that's a great, it's more of a statement, that's a great aspect of design being at the forefront of books, isn't it?
That's true. And it's interesting because I read somewhere, again, my memory, I can't remember where I read it, but someone wrote so beautifully saying, before you even interact with an author's work, you interact with a designer's work. So should you position designer, I'm not overtaking anybody here, but should you position designer slightly ahead of an author's work? So yeah, I totally get that.
So it's because we may be in the business of actually judging books by their covers. And not the other way around.
And they must, otherwise it will be out of job.
Yeah, my students always say that to me. Devangana, what is this? Don't judge a book by its cover. Isn't in human instinct to do that? I'm like, yeah, judge it, but just wear a different hat. Just understand the process behind it rather than just dismissing, orange cover, I don't want it. Just don't do that, and these are also students of visual communication design. So they're like, we are visual thinkers. How can we not judge a book? So it's good since you're appreciating, yeah.
And thank you for following my work, Paramita.
We can take a few more.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for the conversation so far. I work in publishing and I'm aware of the difficult conversations that happen at the Jackets meeting. Could each of you maybe talk about one book where there was an element of serendipity in the sense that all departments sort of really rallied behind one cover. And it was also a book that eventually went on to sell a lot of copies. And could you also talk about a book where it was a struggle to get everyone aligned to a particular vision? It took a lot of time, but eventually you felt that all that brainstorming and back and forth really helped bring out the best cover possible. Each from your careers.
One each.
Yeah.
Quick one because.
Okay, one quick each. I worked on a very interesting project about a year ago, which was a series of 14 books. They're almost like reference books on culture. And that was very interesting because that actually helped me sort of work with the creator of those books very closely. And we had this sort of like one look for all these books, and it was almost like one of your, classics where there's just like the old man in the sea. That's it. That's the cover. And we thought we'd just go that route and keep it to that. And, there's just bold typography and you just keep it to those sort of things. And sometimes that makes a lot of difference, right? When you have that kind of collaboration, it kind of works seamlessly. And I think my own book is an example of a complicated one because I worked with my very close friend, my best friend on it. And there were definitely many times when I wanted to strangle him. That's what it is, right? Ultimately, you have to find that kind of middle ground and kind of work around it. Yeah. So.
I'm just going to quickly answer the serendipity part because I was a student at the University of Delhi, and I have read Namita Devi Dayal's Music Room and Suketu Mehta's Maximum City in the same college library without having a clue that this is the profession I'll be entering. And in 2016 or 2017 in Penguin India, I got to rejacket both those covers, and I tried to keep the original life because rejackets are very exciting for me because the book already has a life of its own, and you as a designer have to just take it forward with that sensitivity. So everybody was on board. It was and it's been a long time, and I see those covers unchanged, like the ones I rejacketed, they're still in the market. So I would try to believe that they were successful. So yeah, that's my serendipity answer for your jackets meeting. And Gunjan?
If I have to quickly think about it, let's talk about Gun Island. I think most of you would remember the cover with the king cobra on it. UK, unfortunately, in our system, if a book is acquired globally, they have already done their covers. So, their covers are done like a year in advance. I used to be vehement, and now I can talk about it, that why should we be buying a cover from a foreign publisher when we are fully equipped to do it in-house? And therefore, when the cover was shown to me that this is Amitav's new book called Gun Island that's coming, and it was a blue cover with a Mansa Devi temple in foil, and I genuinely felt, not because Amitav is a friend and I was greedy to design his book, but I genuinely felt that this cover probably wouldn't work for our market because it's too subtle and it actually looks like a backlist cover. And I said, please give me a chance. At least, you can reject it later, but give me a chance to give it a shot. And the cover that you see, the black one with the king cobra on it, that was the first option I shared, and everybody loved it in the jackets meeting, and it got approved, and Amitav also loved it. And what happened after that, some 8 or 9 territories went on buying the cover, and they changed their covers, from Belgium to Canada to US when they paperbacked it, and so many other countries. And it was such a satisfying moment for a creative person to argue, to stand by and say, no, I don't believe in it, and you have to give me a chance to give it a shot.
Okay, thank you for those lovely anecdotes, Ahlawat Gunjan and Ujan Dutta. I think we should close this session so that you can go and attend more exciting sessions. So thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We would like to thank Ahlawat Gunjan, Ujan Dutta and Devangana Dash. Wonderful session.